Comedian, commonly be said like priests, but they're not priests, these are scientists. He went up to a Comedian scientist and asked him a question, something he wanted to know. So then the Comedian scientist asked Alexander how old he was. Alexander responded that he was like 32. So then the Comedian scientist turned to another person and said, "Tell this boy to come back in 40 years when he'll be smart enough to ask me a question that I might want to answer." So, again, that just goes to indicate the scientific superiority of the Comedians over these Eurasian invaders. But anyway, so Alexander the Great, he established his empire, and the Comedians are under his rule as part of his empire. After his death, his empire fractures, and it's divided up among his generals. One of the generals is named Ptolemy. So then the Ptolemies, who are Greek, ruled over Kemet in the Ptolemaic dynasty. And this is when Kemet became referred to as Egyptus by the Greeks. And this is where we get the modern word Egypt. And that's why, if you haven't guessed it, this civilization of Kemet is what is referred to in modern days Egypt, ancient Egypt. But the reason I haven't used that word up until now is because the civilization never called themselves Egypt. That is a derivation of the word used by the Greek invaders to um, refer to this area. It's also important to note that when the Greeks invaded, they started changing the names of cities. And unfortunately, these are a lot of the names we know now. So things like, for example, names like Thebes. The city of Thebes was not called Thebes by the Comedians; that they had their own name for it. But they changed a lot of names. This is a project of cultural imperialism. But anyway, the Greeks ruled for a few centuries, but then after them came the Romans, and I talked about how irrationally violent Eurasians are, but the Romans, well, first of all, Eurasians are irrationally violent. White people in the Eurasian tribe are even more irrationally violent than the other Eurasians. Then the Romans were even more irrationally violent than other white people. So the Romans were just a bunch of fucking psychopaths. They're commonly lauded in modern times um, um, because of white supremacist propaganda, and it's quite funny because a lot of the white people who are kind of on top now. Their groups were also brutalized by the Romans, right? So people like the modern day English, Germans, French, these Germanic people were really just absolutely brutalized beyond belief by the Romans. Um, so the fact that they are lauding the Romans now, upholding Latin as a language of sophistication, it's a testament both to the strength of Roman propaganda and the just how far you can lose yourself if you forget your true ancestral heritage. I know the ancestors of these Germanic peoples who were murdered by the Romans are spinning in their graves. But anyway, that's another subject. Let me get back on track. So the Romans invaded. They were complete psychopaths. They brutalized the place. Um, and we also have to keep in mind the abominations that were being committed. Because first, the Greeks came in, they committed a lot of murder and theft. Keep in mind, Mother Earth does not like that for reasons I previously mentioned. The Romans come in and they commit more murder and theft. And also, the Greeks, it should be noted, also committed, at least at the royal level, because they transformed the pharaoh ship into an actual uh, king system of kingship. So their pharaohs operated more like actual kings and queens, because I think they had some female pharaohs or pharaoh equivalents. But when they did that, they kind of misunderstood what the comedians were doing with the pharaoh marriage thing. Because remember, the pharaoh and his sister would get ceremonially married just to like symbolically and spiritually keep the position within their family, but they would not actually have a sexual relationship or have kids together. The Ptolemaic Greek pharaohs would marry their sisters and actually have sex and have kids. That is massive, massive incest. Mother Earth is not like that, and that is in the leadership position of the country. So the Greeks are committing um, murder, theft, and incest at a high levels. I don't know about it more common levels, but again, in most Eurasian societies, it wasn't a categorical rule. You couldn't marry cousins and things. So there must have been some of that going on. But anyway, Mother Earth doesn't like that. Romans basically the same thing. They didn't have that brother sister marriage thing among the Roman, I guess, governors, because the Romans had governors of now Egypt, they're calling it. But there's a lot of theft and murder. And then it's around this time you begin to have the Sahara creeping up, all the lush vegetation that's in this area starts to dry up. There's still good farming along the Nile, but there's immense pressure being put on the peoples around Kemet. A lot of them are migrating away, and of course, because of the Eurasian invasions of Eurasia, other Africans are flowing through the area. So all that must have put some pressure on Kemet as well, and put stress on the civilization. So the Romans rule after the Roman Empire, at least the Western Roman Empire falls. You have the Byzantine Empire ruling over this region, and the Byzantines are just Greeks. I'll do a segment or a lecture where I cover the Byzantines in the future, but that is just another name for Greeks. Um, you know, they they and the Romans kind of started pretending they're Romans a bit, but they were just Greeks. So the Greeks were there doing Greek things again, being brutal, right? But then what dealt the final blow to Kemet was the Arabs. So the Arabs um, originated kind of in the Caucasus Mountains, migrated down to what we now refer to as the Middle East, which by this point was desert. And this point when the Arabs come, that is after about 500 AD. Oh, and what I forgot to mention is that one major change that happened under the Byzantines was the coming of Christianity. So the Byzantines, with their form of Christianity, which we now refer to as Eastern Orthodox Christianity, converted a lot